Welcome to our Voices of Africa podcast, brought to you by Africa Practice, a strategic advisory firm supplying insights and advocacy solutions to corporations, investors, governments, and foundations in Africa. In a world with complex and interdependent challenges, we take the guesswork out of business engagement. We enable our clients to see more clearly in order to drive sustainable and equitable development.
Welcome to this edition of Voices of Africa, the podcast where I get to speak to trailblazers and change makers who are driving and shaping prosperity on the African continent and helping African communities rise to the challenges, build resilience, and deliver inclusive growth. Today, I'm delighted to be speaking to Almaz Negash. She is the founder and CEO of the African Diaspora Network. And we're going to be speaking about the importance of the diaspora for Africa's development. She's spent a good part of her career dedicated to harnessing and amplifying the power of the African diaspora to accelerate Africa's development. And we're going to be hearing all about that from her in due course. Almaz was born and raised in Eritrea, and then she emigrated to the US to pursue higher education. She's had a successful career in the US, including in academia, and now she's the CEO of the African Diaspora Network, an organization that she founded. Almaz, it's a delight to speak to you today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Marcus.
So I've seen you refer to yourself as a member of the Contemporary Diaspora. Tell us a bit about your journey. What's led you to found the African Diaspora Network? And tell us about the work that you are leading with the network.
Yeah, I call myself Contemporary Diaspora just to be honest about who I am and also not to take the space of the historical African American diaspora who has had incredible struggle and suffering. And I think they're also the ones who paved the way for immigrants like myself to have an opportunity in the United States. That's something that's not lost in me. But I think I started ADN 14 years ago. As you mentioned, I worked as the head of the Global Leadership and Ethics at the Markula Center for Applied Ethics. It was such an incredible opportunity because I was coming from the trade and investment sector where I spent probably about 10 years by that time. To move back to academia was an interesting opportunity, but also a challenge for me because I was not necessarily used to that kind of space. But eventually I learned how much there is going at universities, and especially the specific program that I was responsible for was to bring together former heads of states, which is how I met the former and late President Masire of Botswana. It was during my time at the Markula Center for Applied Ethics. And I think during that period of time, when we were working with former heads of states, and I was very lucky to be in a room with them because that was my job, to really coordinate that whole thing for the university, specifically for the Markula Center. There were so many conversations about the continent, the poverty, the lack of education, the lack of the transition to democracy. But very rarely did I see Black people or Africans speak about that subject. It was actually coming from other former heads of states who want to make a difference on the continent. And I remember was my, I felt like, why are they talking about Africa without Africans? I've always felt that. And then eventually it percolated for many different reasons. I will go to meetings with my friends who are white and wonderful, well-meaning social entrepreneurs. They will do some incredible innovative work. And then they said, okay, we're going to take this to Kenya. We're going to do this in some part of Africa, northern Nigeria. And I'm like, okay, great. Where are the Nigerians? How come you don't have Kenyans there? So I really think that deep inside, I was feeling like, why are other people making a decision on behalf of the continent when the people of the diaspora we can be very helpful. My thinking at the time was, actually, by bringing us at the table, you will be gaining some insight from the very people who have vested interest in the continent and emotional attachment. But, at some point, you have to stop complaining. So this is 2010. Someone said to me, okay, Almaz, you're complaining too much. What are you going to do about it? And I think that was it. That was the perfect way of somebody stopping you from just bickering and do something. And I think the rest is history. I put together 15 of my friends, Americans, Africans, and everybody else in between, women, men, who know me very well, 15 of them. And we met and I said, I have this idea. Can we create the African Diaspora Network? And instead of asking people to invite us, can we invite them? That's really the genesis of ADN. And I had no idea that people would even say this is a good idea, but then it's interesting. 15 of them said, Almaz, this is a great idea. We love this. Go ahead and do it. But then that means you just are going to make it happen no matter what, because I don't know, for some reason, I just felt maybe this is my calling. I'm going to do it. So for 8 years, I was full-time employee at the time running a social innovation network called Step Up Silicon Valley. And for 8 years, I volunteered for ADN. I created the African Diaspora Investment Symposium. I start to work with a lot of community members and the government of the US to give us some seed funding. And I'll be happy to discuss that with you. But that's really the genesis of ADN.
Wonderful. That's lovely to hear. I wonder, just for the benefit of our audience, just classify for me, will you, what is diaspora? It's people of African origin, well, not just African, it applies to any region of the world, but who are living outside their home nation. Is that correct?
Yes. And also, I think that diaspora, when it has been used for generations, I believe it's a Greek word that means immigrant or someone who's out of their country but connected to their home country somehow. And so we've got all kinds of diaspora. The Irish diaspora, the most powerful and mighty diaspora that has made huge impact in my own pursuit to create ADN, the Indian diaspora, and of course, early on, the Jewish diaspora, very powerful in their own take. So every country has its own diaspora community that they work with. But I think the difference for ADN is I wasn't necessarily interested in just doing one country. So I said, let's just bring all our people together, because I really believe in diversity of ideas, people, and all kind of things that come so beautifully when we're from different parts of the world. I'm so used to that kind of space. So for me, bringing the African community together was not necessarily a jump in anything that I've done. I've been lucky that I've been in that space for a long time on a different scale. But to bring the 54 countries together, it's not easy. But we proved that it's possible, and we are here. I mean, 14 years is a long time in many ways. And in fact, it's interesting when you mentioned diaspora. I think diasporans in general are emotionally still connected to their home country. And it's interesting, even now, the first generation, the second generation, through the family connection to their own home country, are also connected to their ancestral land. So I think there is a very good thing that diasporans do, and talk about that. But for Africans, we're now not only connected to our home country, in my case would be Eritrea, and I will always be connected to who I am, and I know who I am. But I am also incredibly connected to the entire continent and the community where I live, for me, the United States, and wherever I might live. So I think the diaspora is a force for good, in my opinion. The diaspora is a community that is so connected to their community and wanted to do something back in it. And they do it. They're not just wanting to, they really, really.
Yeah, let's talk about that force for good. How big is that force? How big is the African diaspora?
Huge. It's huge. It's huge. It's not the number, it's the impact. The impact of the diaspora is incredible. And that's really what inspires me. I'll give you 2 examples. In 2023, according to the World Bank, the African diaspora remitted $100 billion to the continent. $100 billion. It's incredible. That's 3 times more than what Africa gets from development or any other funding or foreign direct investments. And one specific example that I like to use, because it really makes sense when you distill it down to a country, Nigeria. Nigerians in 2022 remitted $20 billion to their country, and only 0.9 billion in foreign direct investment. So I am asking this question to the governments of Africa, to any investor who is interested on the continent. How can we use the capability of the diaspora to be considered as co-investors on the continent outside beyond remittances. And I say beyond remittances, I can talk to you about that. It was an initiative we started in 2022. Now it's an integral part of our strategy. So the diaspora remits that much money, which is wonderful. And in fact, this is the money that we know has been transacted through banks and some other fintech apps and all that. But there's also the untold amount of money that gets to be sent to my friend. Hey, Marcus, can you take this to my mom since you're going to Botswana? Give it to her. That's the cash money that is not. So there's also that money that has not been accounted for. Regardless, remittances are good because they do some good work in terms of paying rent, education, probably healthcare, and then some other immediate needs that families have, but they're not scalable. They're not scalable because they're transactional. It's between me and you versus the larger community. Yes, some remittances have been known to really do a very impactful work in that community, but also remittances, has been so many studies, can also create dependency, meaning that if I don't exist and I was the only one supporting my family, what would they do when I die? That is actually a very well-researched document. So many societies, not only Africa, can see Southeast Asian countries, especially the Philippines. They've done so much research on this that we need to think a little bit more about how can we go as diasporans beyond remittances and to try to begin to imagine and reimagine and also co-create an investment platform where we can also tap into our savings. I want to clarify this so that many people who are listening to your podcast don't feel like I'm saying don't send remittances. I'm not saying that. I just think that the diaspora also has savings, and I'm only thinking in a way those that we know within our own network and others around the world to tap into our savings and start to invest on the continent, regardless of which country that is. So this could be an investment, a pure ROI that they can get. If I happen to be Kenyan and there's an opportunity in Nigeria, why shouldn't I invest in? So this is really to go beyond borders, beyond the lines on the continent, and beyond remittances. How can we do that? And the conversation is very right. The time is right. And I think that gives you a sense of what the diaspora do. I can also discuss, it's not only the money that we give, it's the skills transfer, the mentoring, the knowledge sharing, the knowledge exchange that happens between diasporans and the people of the continent. Very happy to discuss that and give you some examples.
I'd love to talk about some of those things in a moment, but I'd love to stick to that theme that you just talked to, beyond remittances, providing opportunities for diaspora to invest in projects which, I think, to paraphrase what you said, would have more transformational impact on the continent, potentially. We hear anecdotally of some initiatives, usually driven by celebrities. I'm thinking of Idris Elba and his determination to invest in film production in West and East Africa, I think. And I was speaking with a client just recently who is thinking very hard about how to create a platform for the diaspora to invest in some of their projects, again, in countries, about a dozen countries on the continent. So a pretty exciting opportunity. But I wonder, tell us from the initiatives and the work that you've been doing in this space, well, what's going to be required to reach a tipping point where we see much more of that, what is significant sums of money directed towards investments distinct from remittances?
That's a very good question. And that's actually where the challenge is and the opportunity. So I think we, the diasporans, like anybody else, nobody wants to give their money simply because I want to give you something.
Right.
We want to trust, we want to really see if there is an ecosystem that's conducive to investment. This has always been an issue for any country or any continent. It's not only Africa. The challenge for Africa and for the diaspora is, yeah, I have money, I want to invest it, but who do I give it to? So I think what is the next stage on this crusade? Some of them have done it small, family-based investment. That's already happening. That's not even an issue. I mean, I know I can give you examples of Nigerians who are they sold all their stocks to buy land in their ancestral land so that they can really build a big agricultural farm and other things. This has already happened. But I think what we're talking about is, how about this opportunity for infrastructure or other investment opportunities on the continent? It will not come easy. It will require that we build relationship, we build trust. Without trust, you cannot get investment. Investment in general is based on trust, no matter what. So you trust that your investment of 100 shares, you buy 100 shares of a company, trusting that the company is going to do well, but your money, whether it does it or not, is not necessarily guaranteed. But you have some kind of study that you've done, over time, I will get some return. The same thing must happen in order for us, for Africans to feel comfortable. Okay, I want to invest in this mining project. I'm going to give you an example in DRC. But then who am I giving the money to? Is the money that I am investing in will come back to me? Is it going to make a difference in the community? How do I know all these things would happen? So that's where I think this next stage of diaspora engagement has to be. We have to activate the diaspora. In order for that to happen, at ADN, we're aware of. It wasn't necessarily about the 100 diasporans I can go to and say, okay, there's an amazing opportunity. Let's go and invest. There's a high possibility that they may say yes, simply because we know each other, but that's not enough. I think the most important thing we need to do is we need to bring what you said earlier when we were talking. We need to bring the philanthropists, the businesses, the government, the diaspora, and other players together to create a conducive, and then government leaders are very, very important to really create that kind of space. Without that ecosystem, it's going to be a very, very difficult thing that if I don't trust the project leader or the country or that, we would have still a very big a challenge to overcome the mistrust. But I think what we need to do is build the space, and that's going to take some time. But I think that the time to create that kind of collaboration, relationship, and then eventually to bring the investment back to the continent is today, not tomorrow.
Thank you. We do a lot of work on helping investors distinguish between real and perceived risk of investing on the continent. And we're aware that there is a heightened perception of risk, which actually increases the cost of capital for projects in many areas on the continent. And so I was interested to ask you that question to see if the diaspora could be a tool in helping us to address the perception of risk on the basis that the diaspora might have, in many cases, a closer connection, closer awareness of the continent, or certainly the countries where they have family or and friends. You've spent most of your adult life in the US. How useful is the African diaspora in America in projecting an image of a continent that merits investment amongst the American population?
Yes, I actually really am proud of the African diaspora in the United States. I say this because they support the work we do. I mean, ADN will not exist if they were willing to be a part of it. So you cannot just create
how big is it? Could you just, how big is the African diaspora in the US?
Okay. According to the Census Bureau, we are about 2.4 million. So this is from sub-Saharan Africa. I don't think it counts everyone. It probably does not include the northern part, but it's 2.4 million. That's just according to the last Census Bureau, if I am not mistaken. But that is just a snippet. So we're talking, that's only the contemporary diaspora. Those of us who just came to the United States since 1950s, 1960s as students, as refugees, or different reasons we come from our country. And it is also the most educated population. In proportion to Asians and anybody, Africans from the diaspora, the sub-Saharan Africans, are the most educated in the United States. That's really amazing, but nobody talks about this. But it is so true that we are at par with Asians in proportion, because they are the largest number. Africans from the diaspora, highly educated, very motivated. And so we do have that number that we count on. And then at ADN, between our newsletter subscribers and social media, we have reached to about 28,000 people on a regular basis. And so that just tells you we're a snippet of that, but the ripple effect is much more, which we haven't studied yet, or we haven't surveyed. But what we know is the diaspora in the United States is highly connected to the continent. And I'll give you an example. From those that are going back to their home countries to create business and new ventures, you can start from Ethiopia all the way to Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, and then many other countries. These come to my mind because of the fact that I know some of them are part of ADN, Sudanese diaspora, who have created amazing ventures to go back and really build their home country many years ago, are now figuring out how do we support that country post-war. There's a lot that goes on. And I think the diaspora in the United States, the African diaspora, is heavily connected to the continent. And for me, they represent hope. I also believe that the African diaspora in Europe is extremely active, also very connected, and proximity makes it easier for them even to go back and forth.
Have you seen initiatives from African countries to formalize relationships with diaspora communities, whether that be in the US or in Europe or in Asia or further afield?
So this is interesting, and I would hope that we will continue this conversation even offline. In 2012, the African Union had the first Global African Diaspora Summit in Sandton, South Africa. So I actually was there when they brought all the African leaders in your neck of the wood to really have a conversation and to bring the global diaspora together. This includes the contemporary diasporans in the United States, historical diaspora, Afro-Caribbeans, and anybody else within the continent of Africa who migrates within the continent. So they called us the sixth region. You know, Africa has 5 regions, so we are supposed to be the 6th economic region. That's in 2012. So the African Union, ever since then, has been trying to share the importance of the diaspora to bring you forward to where we are today. After that time, there were several countries, a few I can name, Ethiopia, Nigeria, I believe Kenya, Ghana, especially Ghana, because Ghana really had the homecoming efforts, I believe was in 2020 something, 2021, I don't remember the year, of 2022, the year of homecoming. They've done a lot of that to really bring the historical African diaspora back to the continent. So, for example, Ethiopia has intentionally developed a cabinet level, or I believe at a different level, diaspora engagement officer. The same thing with Ghana, with Kenya, Nigeria, their field. And then, of course, everybody does it because they want to really work with their diasporans. And so it's very country specific. It is not necessarily collective, but at least every country has some kind of a relationship with their diaspora. But I think this question is much deeper than that. We always talk about the role of the diaspora, the role of philanthropy, the role of investors, the role of everything. We rarely talk about the role of the governments, who are supposed to create the macro level economic ecosystem where I can come and invest and I know my money will be back. There's a lot of things that really can and must happen through the governments. That kind of conversation, we do it through convening, whether it's at the African Diaspora Investment Symposium or in other events, but I have yet to see an intentional conversation where we can have a really honest discussion about the diaspora and the connection that we have to the country, regardless of where we come from. I do say this because the time is now to make sure that the governments are engaged with us. And when they come, and as I gave you the example of the foreign direct investment to Nigeria, one of the richest countries on the continent in terms of oil and other minerals and extractive business and all that. 0.9 billion versus 20 billion from the diaspora, that really should give you a pause and say, oh, wow, I need to do this. So Nigeria has actually a very well put together diaspora engagement office, very active. I was there in July and I've seen them try to do a lot of different things. But regardless of that, Nigerians actually do invest back in their country, regardless of whatever that ecosystem. It's really an amazing society. So there are those that are already taking place, but I think to the question whether we really have an intentional conversation and making the diaspora as another de-risking factor when investment happens, because you mentioned earlier, a lot of the perceived risk isn't a challenge, but what if you bring the diaspora as a de-risking factor or as a leveraging for investment? How would that look like? Well, we haven't been asked yet, but that's the goal. That's what we're trying to do at ADN is we don't know all the answer for this. I mean, honestly, we don't know. I am very aware when I say this, some of it is aspirational, because I really believe that at some point, Africans would win away from remittances and have sustainable livelihood. We know this is possible when I see Ireland, when I see other countries as an example of what the diaspora was able to do, all these countries that are away from remittances and start to create sustainable communities. But I do believe the diaspora is ready for conversation and action. But it is those hopes that I have that we do, and it may not happen in my lifetime, but I remain hopeful of the youth and many, many different opportunities that I see on the continent that at some point things will change, but we can't wait for tomorrow.
So let me float this, if I may, and just ask you if it's been discussed at any of the investment symposia or forums that you've convened. The prospect that there might be a diaspora bond, that African government could raise debt on the basis of money loaned to it by the diaspora. Because we know from research that Africa Practice did, we know that across the board, African governments are paying more to borrow money on international capital markets than their peers in other continents or regions. And so maybe there's a market there. I'd be interested to see if that has any legs.
So this has been done already. I will start with Eritrea. In 1998, I remember this. In 1998, Eritrea was at war with Ethiopia. And the Eritrean diaspora was mobilized and galvanized. And I'm not kidding you, this is, it includes many of us. And we all and so the government issued a bond. And I mean, I'm not kidding you, a lot of us just jumped into the bandwagon to really make sure that the country is going to be afloat. Don't ask me how the money was used, but I'm just telling you that it was one of the most successful bonds that I have seen in terms of mobilization. That's key. In terms of mobilization, usage is a different story. Nigeria recently had a bond, and I believe that bond was oversubscribed very quickly. Again, the question is, were people happy with the way in which it was used? But this bond issue is not far-fetched. It is doable. The question is, when you do it, who are we doing it with? What is it for? How do we know that the money that we are going to put into this bond is going to be used for what it was intended? I think that's the last part is where we are struggling to make sure that we are trusting, but also we are trying to verify how that works. So yes, and in fact, without mentioning the name of the organization, when I was at the Africa Philanthropy Forum last week, I had a conversation with a senior staffer at a very big multilateral agency on the continent, and specifically on this subject of the diaspora bond. And the conversation was just in a nutshell. I am openly saying to you that so what we're doing at ADN is asking people to go beyond remittances. And they ask me, how do we go about doing that? And we're saying to them that you need to figure this out collectively, individually, but we need to really find, ADN's job is to find the potential partners. And so we're talking to some heavy players on the continent to look at the diaspora as a partner and as a potential co-investor. And we will be able to do that if there was a major multilateral agency on the continent that is going to back up this bond, not only the governments, but to your question, it is doable and bonds are, we do this. We just voted for bond in my own community, Sunnyvale, to create library and everything. And so, yes, it is doable. We just have to know who we are doing it with and then why.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing that. When I was preparing to speak to you, I had a chat with my colleague Richard, who you've met, and he and I were speaking something that I'd never reflected on before. He pointed out the size of the African diaspora within the continent. So Africans living outside of their country of birth. And it had never really dawned on me before. Of course, it should do. But when I think of diaspora, like most other people, I think of Africans beyond Africa. But I wonder, does your work extend to networks amongst diaspora within the continent? And do you have any views on how, in many cases, influential networks could be harnessed in the same way?
Yes, well, Richard, God bless him, and I, when we met, I brought this up, and he said, "Oh, I didn't know," and I said, "No, you should know." Yeah, we're actually working on this together. We'll figure it out how we do it, but we are way ahead of the curve in a sense that we're fast at what we're trying to do. So when we discussed this, we had a meeting after I met him at Oxford. So I said to him, do you know that most migration, up to 75% of Africans migrate within Africa? And then we are told to believe that, I mean, Africans are going by the storm to Europe, to the United States. That's not true. Actually, the truth is that you've got Ethiopians in South Africa. You know this. You've got Nigerians in South Africa. You've got Eritreans in Rwanda, in Zambia, in Zimbabwe, in Tanzania, in Kenya, on and on and on. And some of them are incredibly successful beyond one's imagination. And yet, nobody is really bringing them together. So I proposed to Richard that we work together to identify who they are, to try to figure out intra-diaspora collaboration. That's why what we call it the Intra-Africa Diaspora collaboration is what we're trying to work on. Yes, I do believe that is possible. We haven't done that. Nobody has done that I know. The only people who have really figured this out and we're trying to do is the Global Compact, which is how I ended up knowing about this number when I was serving at the UN Economic Commission for Africa High-Level Panel on Immigration and Migration. I served in that panel from 2017 to 2019. And in every meeting, we will have this conversation of the number of diasporans outside of Africa versus inside of Africa. And that has not been necessarily harnessed. That's the biggest, in a way, the biggest diaspora and the largest one within the continent is on the continent. And of course, the largest African diaspora outside of Africa is, I don't know if you know this, but it is in Brazil, 90 million of them. Brazil has the highest number of African diaspora. Yes. So anyway, I just wanted to say that, yes, there's a huge, huge opportunity for us to figure out and come up with a way to bring them together, to collaborate, co-create, and co-invest, because there is tremendous opportunity. And Richard and I will figure it out. I will bring you in as well. So we're working on it.
Brilliant. Well, I should explain to our listeners that Richard is my fabulous colleague, Richard Kiplagat, who looks after our operations in East Africa and sits on our group board as well. Well, I'm pleased that I asked you that question, and thank you for elaborating that. Phenomenal to hear those figures. And to demystify what is a commonly held perception, certainly beyond the continent, that, as you say, migration is happening only to Europe and to OECD countries, when of course it's not. It's happening mostly within the continent. Well, we have come to almost the end of our allotted time, and I want to let you go. But before I let you go, we have a tradition of asking our guests to paint for us a picture of a prosperous Africa that inspires the world. From your vantage point, you have the opportunity to reflect on those aspects of the African diaspora that give you the greatest source of pride when you think about them.
Oh, thank you so much. So let me tell you what makes me happy, and it's right in front of me, and that is the generosity of the diaspora. The diaspora, when asked whether they happen to be from Kenya or Cameroon or wherever, if I ask them, and I'm going to say this, I'm going to make it very personal. When I ask them, okay, there's a young kid who's really trying to get access to resources, or one of our builders of Africa's future who needs a mentor, or one of our accelerator Black leadership and entrepreneurship member who needs mentoring or introduction to somebody, could you please help? And I'm not kidding you. almost all the time, they all say yes. And that is the part that I believe where hope is for the diaspora to do more than just that. So I never had, and I mean this literally, I don't ever have someone saying, I can't do it. But then they don't say just that. They always say, I cannot do it, but I know someone else who can help you. Let me introduce you. That's how this network is growing and how I grew with the network, and the organization continued to grow in itself. But the diaspora, in terms of knowledge transfer, knowledge sharing, mentoring, skills sharing, they are so, so generous. And so I think the diaspora gives me hope. And the other ones that give me the best hope possible for the continent is the youth. They're incredible. They're very powerful. They're beautiful, and they're restless. And I am really rooting for them so that someone can hear them and the change will happen. So I think I'm betting on the diaspora and the youth, and then all our other partners who believe in this mission to make a difference. And then for what you and I talked about, for the common good or the greater good, or for the real, for the society more than anything else. That really gives me hope.
Well, thank you. That's a lovely note on which to end. Thanks so much for your time today and for sharing the fabulous work of your organization and shedding light on the power, the might of Africa's diaspora. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful afternoon, all of you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning into a Voices of Africa podcast this week. Voices of Africa is a forum where Africa's leading experts weigh in on cross-sectional topics affecting the continent. Experts share their views on how we can unlock greater value that will benefit industry, government, and communities. For more of our insights, visit our website or subscribe to our weekly newsletter, Views on Africa, in the description.